You're 4 years old. You're sitting alone at a table, and your feet don't touch the floor. In front of you, on a plate, is one marshmallow. A grown-up you barely know has just made you a strange offer. You can eat this marshmallow right now. Or, if you can sit here and not touch it until they come back, you'll get 2. Then they walk out, and they don't tell you how long. This is the marshmallow test. And for almost 50 years, the world believed that what a child did in that chair, a 4-year-old, alone with a piece of candy, could tell you how their entire life would turn out. Whether they'd be successful, whether they'd be healthy, whether they'd win or fall behind. One marshmallow and your whole future written into it. That was the claim. And the truth is far stranger than the claim, because the test may have been measuring something almost nobody guessed. Not your willpower, not your character, something you never chose at all. Start with what actually happened, because the real experiment is smaller and stranger than the legend it became. In the late 1960s, a psychologist named Walter Mischel was running studies at the Bing Nursery School on the Stanford University campus. His subjects were preschoolers, 3, 4, 5 years old. The setup was almost cruelly simple. A child is brought into a bare room. On the table, a treat. Sometimes a marshmallow, sometimes a cookie or a pretzel, whatever that child said they liked. The rules are explained in words a 4-year-old can follow. Eat it now, and that's all you get. Wait until the grown-up comes back, and you get 2. There's a little bell on the table. Ring it, and the adult returns immediately. But then you only get the 1. And then the child is left alone with the one thing they've just been told not to eat. What happens next is the whole experiment. Some children caved before the door even closed. They grabbed it in seconds. Others fought. And watching them fight is the part that stays with you. Kids covered their eyes with their hands. They turned their chairs to face the wall. They kicked the table leg, sang to themselves, tugged their own hair, talked to the marshmallow, stroked it like a tiny pet, sniffed it, and put it back down. One boy leaned in close, then pulled away, like it might bite him. On average, only about a third of the children managed to hold out the full 15 minutes. The rest broke somewhere in the middle, a long, squirming battle that ended with a small hand darting forward. It looked like the purest test imaginable. A window straight into a child's willpower. Strip away everything else, put a human being alone with temptation, and see what they're made of. And you already know this test. You've been sitting in that chair your whole life. The second slice of cake, the snooze button at 6 a.m., the thing in the cart you didn't come in for. Every one of them is a marshmallow, and a version of you is deciding whether to wait. Here's where a small nursery school study turned into one of the most famous ideas in psychology. Years later, Mischel and his colleagues did something clever. They went looking for those same children, now teenagers, now adults, and asked how their lives had turned out. And the pattern they reported was electric. The kids who had waited longer as preschoolers, they said, grew into teenagers with higher SAT scores. They handled stress and frustration better. Decades on, they were reported to be healthier and to have held their lives together in ways the grabbers hadn't. Think about how enormous that claim is. 15 minutes, one 4-year-old, one piece of candy, and out of it, a line drawn all the way to a 40-year-old success. The world ran with it, and it ran fast. The marshmallow became a crystal ball. Willpower became the master key, the single trait that supposedly separated the people who make it from the people who don't. Parents started running the test on their own kids at the kitchen table. Self-control got sold as the thing to train above all else. Because look, a marshmallow can see your future. It was a beautiful, simple story. Wait, and you win. And beautiful, simple stories are exactly the ones you should check twice. Because there's a detail inside Mischel's own work that quietly breaks the willpower story before anyone else lays a finger on it. When he looked closely at the children who managed to wait, they were not sitting there white-knuckling it, staring the marshmallow down and grinding through raw self-discipline. Just the opposite. Kids who lasted were the ones who found ways to not look. They turned around. They covered their eyes. They sang. They played with their shoelaces. They invented little games. Some of them told themselves the marshmallow wasn't even real food. It was just a puffy cloud or a picture of a marshmallow, something you'd never want to eat. Mischel had a name for this. He called it cool versus hot thinking. Stare at the marshmallow as a warm, sweet, delicious thing you can almost taste that's hot, and hot loses. Turn it into something cold and abstract. A shape, a cloud, an idea that's cool, and cool waits. So sit with what that means. The children who passed weren't stronger. They had a technique. They knew, or stumbled into, a trick. Don't fight the wanting. Just refuse to look at it. Willpower was never the muscle doing the work. Attention was. You already know this in your own life. The snack you can't stop thinking about while it sits on the counter becomes easy the moment it's in a cupboard you don't open. It's not that you got stronger. You just stopped looking. The marshmallow test, at its best, wasn't measuring how much willpower a child had. It was measuring whether they'd learned to look away. day. So would you have waited? Before you answer, hold on to that, because the ground is about to move. For decades, that whole towering idea, the marshmallow as a crystal ball, was balanced on a surprisingly thin base. The original follow-ups tracked a small group of children, and not just small specific. They came largely from families connected to Stanford University. Kids of professors, of graduate students, growing up in a stable, comfortable, well-fed corner of the world. In 2018, a team of researchers led by Tyler Watts decided to test the test. They ran a much larger version data on more than 900 children verified, drawn from far more varied backgrounds across the country, not one leafy campus. And the crystal ball cracked. They did still find something. Kids who waited longer did tend to do a little better later on, but the effect was roughly half the size the legend had promised. And then they did the thing that mattered most. They accounted for the child's background, the family they came from, their mother's education, the income and stability around them in those early years. And when they did, the marshmallow's predictive power mostly dissolved. By the time these kids were 15, the link to how they actually behaved had all but vanished. Read that carefully, because it flips the whole thing. The marshmallow wasn't reading the child's character and projecting it forward. It was mostly reflecting the home the child had just walked in from. A kid from a stable, resourced household tended to wait and tended to do well later for the same underlying reason: the world they came from. The marshmallow didn't cause the future. It was a mirror pointed backward at a life that had already started shaping them long before they sat down. Which leaves the real question standing there, uncomfortable and open. If it isn't willpower and it isn't a crystal ball, what is a child actually doing when they decide to wait? The most unsettling answer came from a study in 2013 at the University of Rochester, led by a researcher named Celeste Kidd. She added a single step before the marshmallow ever appeared. First, she made each child a promise. She told them she'd bring better art supplies to draw with, then left the room. For one group of children, she came back with exactly what she'd promised. For the other group, she came back empty-handed. A little apologetic, sorry. There weren't any after all. She did this twice. So each child had learned, in their own small body, one of two lessons. This adult keeps her word, or this adult doesn't. Then, and only then, came the marshmallow. The results were stark. Among the children who had just learned the adult was unreliable, almost none held out, most grabbed the treat quickly. Among the children who had learnt she was reliable, they waited, on average, about 4 times longer. Now look again at the child who grabs the marshmallow. For 50 years, we called that child impulsive, weak, lacking. But if you're 4 years old and the adults in your world have taught you that promises don't come true, then eating the marshmallow now isn't a failure of willpower. It's the correct answer. Why would you bet on a second marshmallow from a world that has never kept its word? Grabbing it is smart. It's a rational read of the room. And this is where the honest part lives. The part most versions of this story skip. We still don't fully agree on what the marshmallow test measures. Some of it is that looking away technique. Some of it is background and stability. Some of it is trust, whether a child has learned the future is safe to bet on. Untangling those threads is genuinely hard, and scientists are still arguing about the exact mix. The one thing that no longer holds up is the simplest version, that it's a clean readout of a child's inner strength. That story is the one piece almost everyone now agrees was wrong. So go back one last time to that 4-year-old, feet swinging under the table, one marshmallow in front of them. For half a century, we looked at the child who grabbed it and saw a small failure in the making, someone who just couldn't hold on, but we may have had it backwards the whole time. That child might have already learned something the waiters hadn't, that the good thing in front of you is the only one you can count on, so you take it. And the child who waited wasn't necessarily made of stronger stuff. They may simply have been lucky enough to grow up somewhere the second marshmallow always arrived. The test was never really measuring the child. It was measuring the world the child came from, and then, for 50 years, we blamed the child for it. So the next time you break a small promise to yourself, the diet, the alarm, the plan you were sure you'd keep before you reach for the word week, try a harder question. Not, why can't I just wait, but what taught me that waiting doesn't pay? This has been Unstuck. One fact, one question you take with you.